Israel.
100 years ago, W.B. Du Bois dreamed of producing the first encyclopedia of African history. That dream was realized last week with the launch of Microsoft CD-ROM Encarta Africana. Its multimedia format transcends the confines of a traditional encyclopedia and captures the rich sensory experience of the African diaspora. It catalogs African historical and cultural achievements from 4 million B.C. to the present. Henry Louis Gates, Jr. and Kwame Anthony Appiah of Harvard University are the project's co-editors, and I am pleased to have them here to talk about this monumental achievement. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you, Charlie.
Welcome. It's great to have you here. So how did this idea, other than the credit we gave for W.B. Du Bois, how did it come about?
Well, Du Bois had this idea that racism was caused by ignorance, and the most effective way to combat racism was to combat ignorance. And the most effective way to do that was to edit a comprehensive black encyclopedia, the whole black world, a black Britannica.
Right.
So he had the idea in 1909, and until his death, literally, he pursued this idea. He ended up in Ghana at the request of Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, who invited them there in 1961 to edit the Encyclopedia Africana. But by this time, Du Bois had narrowed the focus to an encyclopedia just about Africa, and that project is still going on there. So Anthony and I met 25 years ago at Cambridge,
right.
And we decided that we would do it along with the great Nigerian writer Wole Soyinka, who was my professor.
Right.
We made a pact that we would try to go back to Du Bois's original 1909 idea and edit this encyclopedia, and 25 years, almost to the day after we made that pact, we did it.
Now, where does Bill Gates and Microsoft come into this picture?
Well, we started peddling this idea in 1979.
Notice this is a great big idea of an important contribution of a people to a nation. And they're peddling the idea.
We were peddling the idea, man. We approached every major publisher in New York. Starting in 1979, when I was an assistant professor at Yale, I wrote to Britannica and asked them if they would do it. And they said, well, if you raise $20 million, we'll be glad to publish it for you. Well, obviously, I couldn't do that. But starting actively in 1995, with the help of Quincy Jones and Marty Payson, by the way, as financial backers, we approached all sorts of publishers, Random House,
right.
Simon & Schuster, Oxford, and we ended up, to make a long story short, with a book company called Perseus Books, founded by Frank Pearl. He was the first person to commit to funding our project. He's a great man. And then the next day, literally, after all those years, the next day Microsoft came through. And so they split the budget, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Budget was what?
It's about $2 million.
Yeah, to do this. Now, I'm holding up this CD-ROM that you're so proud of, because this is what it would look like in book form.
Yeah, it will
about this.
It will come out in
about this size.
That's right.
And all of that is in here.
That's right.
And most people now, as they get CD-ROM capability on their PC, can just dial it up, huh?
Yep, they can, and they can. It's on 2 CDs actually, because there's so much media that it doesn't fit on one. But all the words, all the 2.25 million words, are on both CDs, so if you swap it around, you've always got the words with you. And of course, the heart of an encyclopedia always is the words, the knowledge, the information, but this is illustrated in a way that you can only do now in this extraordinary new medium.
Can you make a case that there was a huge demand for this, that African Americans didn't have this kind of document so that they could go with their children, with their mothers and fathers, and sort of share history?
I can make that case now, because for the last couple of weeks we've been going around, and we've been, for example, into CompUSA stores. We went into one on Fifth Avenue here, and people came up and thanked us almost with tears in their eyes and said that they'd been waiting for this, African Americans mostly. And so I think there is a huge demand. It's never been done. Nobody's ever put the black world together before. We've had encyclopedias of African-American things. We've had some encyclopedias that have dealt with the Caribbean, Latin America. We've had, obviously, encyclopedias of Africa. But to try and bring together again all the things that have been split apart by, in the first instance, of course, by slavery, that's not been done before.
It begins where?
Well, the earliest event, the earliest object on there is the bones of Lucy, who's the common ancestor of all of us, who was an African, if living in Africa makes you an African, though she's obviously an ancestor of us all. And the last important political event, which we were able to get in before we closed, was President Clinton's visit to Africa last year.
Mm. It will mean what, you think, Kip?
Well, we've thrown down a black presence on the information superhighway. That's the first thing. You know, content. We have the contours of the whole black world. Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, Black America, plus Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Alexander Pushkin is in here, Alexander Dumas, because they had black ancestors,
right.
But not Beethoven, unfortunately. We looked for the brother, but we couldn't find enough brothers in his past. But it means, Charlie, that nobody ever again will have to start at ground zero. I mean, they'll be able to stand on our shoulders just like we stood on the shoulders of the great black scholars and white scholars who were concerned about black subjects for the last century.
You did a Norton anthology, African-American literature, correct? Mm-hmm. Now, how is that different?
Well, the Norton anthologies consist of primary sources. Right. Literature by Langston Hughes or Zora Neale Hurston or Sterling Brown or Ralph Ellison. This is the interpretation of over 400 scholars from Africa, Europe, the United States, and South America about the black world. People writing about Joe Louis, I mean, the example you gave, or Willie Mays, or blacks in the military, or black scientists, or Timbuktu, or Nubia, the black pharaohs of the Nile.
Do you end up, though, in a sense, eliminating having conflicts over how do you appreciate a certain person, and because of ideological conflicts or otherwise, you have sharp disagreements over what history ought to say about, let's take Malcolm X, let's take Louis Farrakhan, let's take others that have been controversial and their achievements?
Well, Malcolm and Farrakhan are there along with everybody else. And what you do for a controversial person is say, some scholars believe this, some scholars believe that, and you try to take a scholarly Olympian sort of view, the encyclopedic voice it's called. You don't mask the controversy, you put them all out there. And we chose, consciously, scholars from the left, the right, some Afrocentrists, some structuralists, some this is, some that is, a little bit of everything. And we even set up a website called Africana.com so that people can now, if they don't like our interpretation, they can comment. They can send us an email and say, you should change this if you do another edition. Yeah. You should add this, you should subtract that, and we welcome that. It's meant to be an interactive learning tool.
How much of this would you put on the web, on a website?
Well, right now, we, on our website and on the Encarta website that Microsoft runs, about 3 or 4% of the content is rotated every week, I think, so that you can get a sense of what's on there. In the short run, however, that's what we're going to do, because in the long run, somebody has to figure out how you can pay for content of this quality on the web. But so right now, most of the information that's in there is only available fully in the CD-ROM version. But obviously, in the long run, we'd love to have this sort of information out on the web. I mean, our interest in this is to communicate the sense of excitement that we have as scholars who, for the last 25 years or so, have devoted our lives to studying African-American life, and who find it intensely interesting and who want other people to share our what we've learned and what many other scholars have worked on.
Because, Charlie, let's face it, the ultimate form of racism is intellectual racism. Most people do not think that persons of African descent have a great intellectual and cultural tradition, that we made major contributions to civilization. And that's the truth. And I think that much of the suffering that our people have experienced...
Is it they don't think they've made, or they don't know, just don't know?
Well, but they're simultaneous. I mean, they're coterminous. I mean, what's the difference at some point? Some people, the worst racists, think that we're incapable of civilization. At best, most people are ignorant. Yeah. Okay? So what we've done is we've provided a tool that makes that excuse, that renders that excuse moot. There is no way anymore that anyone can say, I didn't know that there were black pharaohs in Nubia. I didn't know that there was a great library in Timbuktu. We even take you to those places in videos. I didn't know that there were black scientists. You know, I didn't know that there were black people who wrote books in Latin during the Renaissance. Things like that. That's a very, very important thing for them to do. Most people think we have some kind of basketball gene, that we excel at sports and not in the arts, or not in intellection. And of course we do and we have, and it's important to establish that. So that we think that Du Bois's original idea in part was right, that ignorance does cause racism, and that this, properly disseminated, can help to end that racism.
What does properly disseminated mean?
Well, we want to get it into the schools, but we also want to
give it to the schools, or they pay for it?
Well, we're giving away, the Gates Foundation is giving away 8,000 copies to libraries, and having selected the poorest libraries to start with, and another 3,000 copies, I believe, through another program. We're going to give away lots of copies of the book as well. But we also want, in addition to the schools, we want it to be in boys and girls clubs, Colin Powell's program. He and I were on the phone
Volunteers
talking.
Or something.
Yeah, we were on the phone talking about that this morning, but also Sunday schools. Why not turn African-American Sunday schools into the equivalent of Hebrew schools? Now, I didn't go to Hebrew school, but a lot of my friends did. And as I understand it, people learn about their culture and history as well as God and Moses and the Ten Commandments. Why don't we wire the Sunday schools? A black environment, black-owned, black-created, a nourishing environment where kids don't act out like they do in schools, so that we can make our churches neighborhood learning centers. They can learn about computers and learn about African and African-American culture. We call it the Black to the Future Project.
It seems to me that there are two parallel tracks, though, therefore required. One is to the input of personal computers with the CD-ROM capability, and secondly, make this available, and thirdly, in a sense, get people to be friendly with the PC, so they can go and use this, and so they appreciate it, and so they have access to it.
Nobody's going to be able to succeed in the next century, the next millennium, if they belong to a community that is not on the web, on the computer literate. It should become as automatic a part of our repertory of tools as writing or reading. It's a new tool. It needs to be learned. We need to learn how to use it, and we need to get people into it. And especially for young African Americans, I think there hasn't really been the kind of exciting but also solid and reliable content to draw them in. And this is only a start, but I think it's a very important start, because now you can say, as Quincy Jones says in one of the videos that he did for this product, that you can't understand where you are if you don't know where you're coming from. And this is a chance to understand black history in a very deep way. And because anybody who has access to this has access also to the web, and because each of the articles is linked into the web so that we send people off to do their own research out of the product, in libraries, with further reading and on the net, it really is going to connect people into the whole world of the new information technology, but by drawing them in with something they're already interested in. Nobody's going to be drawn into this technology except a few specialists by the excitement of the technology itself. It has to be doing something for you. And this is one kind of thing that I think that the technology can do for you, do for young African Americans.
A couple of questions about African Americans and politics, USA, 1 year before the millennium. Did the race initiative do anything, make a difference?
Well, I think that it's funny you mentioned that. Last night I was reading, Randy Kennedy has a nice piece in the American Prospect about Bill Clinton as Soul Man. Right. You know, Chris Rock, Toni Morrison, and Jack White have all talked about him as a black man. Yeah.
Tony's famous word was, he's our first black president.
Our first black president, that's right. And Chris Rock's a lot raunchier in why he's the first black president, but their point was the same. And Randy Kennedy says at least he had us talking about race. At least we were getting it out of the closet and putting it on the table. No, I didn't think that the race initiative took sufficient account of class. Now, we talked about this before. Last time Cornel West and I were on, we talked about the fact that it was the best of times, the worst of times. We have the largest black middle class in our history, but the black underclass, as measured by the percentage of black children who live at or beneath the poverty line, is almost exactly what it was the terrible day in 1968 when Martin Luther King was assassinated. How can you quadruple the middle class, on the one hand, the black middle class, and that number stay the same, that percentage stay the same? That is a problem, because what it means is that we're producing two classes within the black community. The middle class, which is perpetuating itself, and this black underclass, which is perpetuating itself. That bothers me tremendously. I have moral, ethical problems with that. And I've written about it, and I plan to continue writing about it.
You have a program to do something about it?
No, I don't have I mean, I have no magic cures, but that's why we want at least the education aspect, which is what ostensibly we should know about. That's why we want to address it by using the internet and using computers, because we think that our children, black children, are being forced into a new kind of enslavement, the enslavement of ignorance, without knowing about computers. We'll be further and further behind. I think that there should be a comprehensive jobs bill, like the National Urban League calls for every year, a Marshall Plan for the cities. But I also think we should think about moving inner city workers out of the inner city to the job belts. We should develop more programs for that. I mean, so while I'm all for empowerment zones, I think that they would be easy to empower if we could get people out of these inner cities and move them to places that are economically
Some kind
healthy.
of voucher for transfer to another community to work?
Well, whatever form it might take, but in effect, yeah.
Okay. Leadership today. Is there simply among most Americans an absent appreciation for African-American gains and an African-American leadership corps in business and science and areas other than sports and entertainment?
Well, I think people, and one of the things you can do in something like this is to show people part of the world that maybe they don't know about the advances that have been made by this successful middle class. I think, you know, there's an illusion created by the combination of success and failure, which is that people see the failures. The failures make better news stories, perhaps. They make better they make better pictures, perhaps. And so the good story doesn't get told. But you know, the fact of the enormous enthusiasm for General Powell, I think, does suggest that there is a cross-racial appreciation for the possibility of black leadership, not just of the African-American community, but of the nation, which is, after all, what he provided in the for our armed forces as the leading military servant of the nation. And I think that there is something that would have been unimaginable, surely, 30 years ago, a real acceptance that at that level there now are people who deserve attention of everybody, like Congressman Watts, who is a very senior member now of the Republican Party.
Wife from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Are you sorry that Colin Powell didn't run for president? You regret that he didn't?
Do I regret that he didn't run? I don't. In the end, no, because I don't think that it's good for someone to run for president if he and his family don't really want to do it.
No, that's true. That's a nice, safe answer.
But I want there to be a black president. Do I want there to be a black president? Absolutely.
And he's your best shot.
He's the best shot right now. But I don't think he could have beat Bill Clinton. And the question is, how can he win?
Bill Clinton thought he could beat Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
He did. Said so. And
Yes.
probably could have. I believe he probably could. I think Bill Clinton's political instincts were better than yours and mine.
But look at the Republican Party. I mean, I listened, coming from the airport today, I listened to the live broadcast of the Senate hearings. I just keep thinking of Henry Hyde and these guys. And it made me think of something that Colin Powell said in an interview I did with him, which was
a very good piece.
the problem, thanks, but the problem is the Republican primaries. When you have to go, excuse me, you have to, sorry, Charlie, it's that cold I picked up from you.
Right.
Yeah.
When you have to outright the right.
In order to get to everybody else.
And then you hit the middle. And these guys, there are a lot of people there who are...
My argument always was winning the election, general election, was never as big a problem as getting the nomination was, and what you would suffer getting the nomination.
Yeah, and for him, he would have to go through such gyrations. And here's a man who's pro-choice, defends affirmative action. It's going to be hard to get those Republicans to vote for him. And then you have all these guys, I mean, all these revelations about the CCC and the you know, these people with sheets in the closet.
And all that.
Yeah.
I mean,
speaking to these groups, man, it gives you the creeps.
I don't know what those people think about when they go associate with those guys.
No, it's disgusting. Yeah. And these little bland apologies they're giving are insufficient for me, starting with Trent Lott.
Thank you. This is Microsoft Encarta Africana, a comprehensive encyclopedia of black history and culture. There it is with a picture of Dr. King on the cover. I thank you very much.
Thank you
for coming. And thank you for joining us. See you tomorrow night.